Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Lauren. How are you today?
Awesome. I'm excited to have this discussion with you
I am too. We're talking about a really interesting subject.
that we are. If you happen to hear my dog in the background, I apologize. He's sort of attached at my hip.
Huh,
All right.
no
So
worries.
I'm Lauren Meece. I'm a former Olympian from the 2000 Sydney Olympics. I placed ninth at World Championships at the age of 16 and was a Pan American bronze medalist, which is my big to do in my own brain because I fought with a broken hand to obtain that bronze medal. I am an advocate for adaptive judo, and I do work with all varying abilities. However, one of my main focuses is to work with individuals that are on the spectrum. Would you like to
Wonderful.
introduce
Yep, and my name is Jonathan Semetko. I'm a judo club owner in Utah. For the last 20 years, I've been a special education teacher, and I specialize in part in working with students with disabilities.
yourself? Awesome. I did not know that about you, Jonathan. That's wonderful. Good for you. Uh, Yes, and so I have like I said, varying abilities. I work with individuals with Down syndrome, but I do have a high level of clientele that are neurodiverse, specifically on the spectrum. And today's purpose of our discussion is just to explore effective strategies for teaching judo to students with autism and to understand how different support needs influence the teaching methods. Uh, would you like to kind of review for everyone, what you see as your definition of autism?
Hmm. So, as I look at what autism is, I see it primarily as a difference in processing. A difference of processing that leads to a different way of understanding the world that really is different from persons who are typically developing or who are neurotypical, if you prefer that terminology. And so, what is autism? It's a different way of seeing the world.
Right. And from like an objective point of view, it's considered a neurodevelopmental disorder and it affects social and communication uh, abilities. And usually, like the stereotype is that, you have a strong focus of interest, mine specifically being judo, repetitive behaviors, and also some sensory sensitivities. But obviously, there's a lot of strengths that come with being on the spectrum. I think that level of hyper focus can, especially for individuals with low support needs, and the term low support needs essentially means in like general terminology, most people utilize the phrase high functioning autism, but within the autism community, not too many people like that term. They kind of just try to flip it and utilize either low support needs, mid-level support needs, or high support needs.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, I am low support needs. It would be considered like level one Asperger's was the former terminology for it. So one example that I could utilize is when I was competing, I traveled quite extensively. And so I became completely desensitized to airports, the chaos of everything, and it actually flipped on it and it created a level of excitement for me to be able to watch everyone. Now, as an adult, I don't travel as much because I do not compete. However, I go to a training camp here or there, maybe twice annually on a maximum, and I now have to have specific like personal accommodations for making sure I have my earbuds in, making sure that I have really comfortable clothing on. There's certain things that I have to do because I am no longer desensitized to that environment, and that's something that I think that most individuals should pay attention to as we proceed through this conversation because that's going to be important to kind of designate in your mind as far as when you're working with these individuals because there is a slow build up to that desensitization when you're interacting with them and trying to teach them judo and working in an adaptive judo framework um, because it will get frustrating and you might not see the results you want right away, but when the results stick from a long term point of view, you see wonderful things happen. Did you want to
Mhm.
touch upon so within like the behavioral specialty worlds, we have a term called the ABCs,
Mhm.
and it's just an abbreviation for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Did you want to touch upon that, Jonathan?
Sure. And so, when we look at any individual who is neurodiverse or neurotypical, we're always looking, and whether they have high support needs or moderate support needs or significant support needs, we're always looking to find a way to empower that person. And we look for tools that permeate all those levels and all those different ways of being and thinking. And one of the really powerful tools, when used well and meaningfully, is the ABC analysis. And you can use very simple versions of it. There's very complicated versions that can be used by experts, but it's a great tool. So, what we're going to look at initially when we use this antecedent behavior consequence analysis, okay, this form of operant conditioning, we're going to look first at what's going on before. And we can look at certain triggers or certain signals. We can also look at things that establish or abolish the likelihood of certain things happening. And we're looking kind of holistically at what's going on before a behavior actually occurs. And when we say behavior, we just mean any old behavior. It's not a loaded term at all. It could be a very neutral behavior. It could be a behavior we consider to be very pro-social, a behavior that maybe is not the optimal behavior for that time and place. And then we look at the behavior itself. And then we look at what follows it and whether it has no influence with what follows in terms of the likelihood of the behavior occurring again, or whether it in fact maybe increases the likelihood of the behavior occurring again or not occurring again. And so this is a really useful tool for understanding life naturalistically. Also a great tool for making changes potentially. So it has both possibilities. But I want to be crystal clear that when meaningfully used, it's always used to empower the individual and give them more control of their own life, regardless of the level of support needed.
Mhm.
So, does that touch upon it pretty well?
I think that it does. One thing that I did want to add is a lot of times within that realm, there's also a terminal, it's a term they use called pairing. Pairing
Yes.
is actually really important because during that process, you will see the ABCs, you will see the antecedent of certain behaviors, the behavior itself, and then the consequences, whether they be negative or positive.
Mhm.
And you can also create that pairing system to make yourself a reward within that context. So, for example, I had one student who really likes candy, he likes trains, and he liked me doing sort of, we called it the Superman, but it was me just mimicking a Tomonagi so he would get comfortable with falling onto the crash pad.
Mhm.
And all of those things were fun for him. So, that pairing process, you may need to take a couple of classes to build up maybe some individual private sessions. So when that student does see you, he equates you with candy, a toy train, and a fun activity. So there's no negative association or antecedent that triggers any behaviors that might be problematic to their learning process. I do
Mhm.
believe that that's pretty important to indicate because you can't really just go in dry with a lot of these individuals. There's a lot of trust boundaries that need to be broken. So,
Mhm.
and continuing on as far as expected behaviors and variability, understanding the range of behaviors in a student with autism is really crucial because you can have, again, somebody who has low support needs like myself. You can have someone who has a mid-level, which maybe their communication's a little more hindered. Um, they haven't quite crossed that line where they are independent and may need someone to shadow in on occasion, may need a different translation of what's happening. And then individuals with high support needs really have to have things broken down more significantly um, to set realistic expectations for their progress and how they're going to um, present themselves within the judo class. And a lot of programs that I've studied, there's one at UCF. The individuals with high support needs always have either a family member as a shadow while they're conducting the class itself, um, or maybe a ABA therapist. There might be a system in place with like a coin system for every activity that they interact with that leads up to some type of positive consequence. So, understanding kind of where to group that individual within those tiered systems can again provide those realistic expectations for you as a coach. Do you have anything that you want to expound upon in that realm, Jonathan?
I think you explained that very well. The only thing I want to add is if we look at these modifications and the steps that we might want to take, we always want to understand that this is just the extension of human behavior. And that, yes, you're going to see different levels of support needs from different individuals. But if we go right back to the roots of judo, right back to Jitakoye, uh, you and I shining together in mutual welfare and benefit, there's an underlying idea there that what is done for our shared benefit. And it's being done not only to help you be your best you and to help you get the things you want to need, but it's good for all of us too. And I just think these taking these steps, going through these practices, even if they're different from what we normally do in our dojo, they're honoring the core intent of judo in the first place.
Exactly. And obviously making our community a better place. And I know that you've probably seen some really wonderful things come from teaching adaptive judo and working with individuals on the spectrum because once they get to that level of click, there's more of a sense of ease. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what most people don't grasp a lot of times with autism is things can be really painful within those processes. But at the same time, you know, you have to think like short-term pain for long-term relief. Um, so, you know, when we're approaching this, you know, I had one student, every time he saw me, he would tell me, time to go home. He had very limited, but, you know, by the time I was done working with him and passed him off to more of like a gen ed coach, he was so excited. He would come in earlier while I was working with his brother, ready to go. And that took approximately a year to accomplish. So, um, just patience and, like you said, mutual benefit for all. Now, when we're focusing more so on approaches for the different subgroups within the autism community, do you want to take a specific group, whether it's low support needs, mid, or high?
You know what? I'll speak about, if I could, the high group, if that's all right.
Yes.
Um, Unless there's a specific group you'd like me to speak on.
No, no, go for it.
Okay. So as I look at the high support, or excuse me, yes, the high support group, I look at the fact that communication might need to be different. There might need to be assistive or augmentative communication devices. There might need to be pictures or use of sign or gesture. There might need to be some understanding of non traditional communication and how that's going to be honored and used between the teacher and the student. And so, would it be okay in the dojo if one of the forms of communication, for example, is a student leading you by hand somewhere? And it may be that that's the best communication, that's the best tool. Would it be okay as a communication tool if the student brought out an iPad they could use to type out an answer or to indicate with the icons what their thoughts or feelings may be? And so, how will these things be discussed and looked at? How will these things be understood? What modifications are you willing to make to accommodate this group in the high support needs? And then you might see behaviors that look non traditional, that might be different from students who are typically developing. And what are your tools to understand and to approach those differences? So, how can you then honor the intent with deliberate, proactive practices and good, proper prior planning to help this individual get to the point where they're receiving benefit and helping you and society receive a benefit too?
Right. And just to reiterate these definitions again, high support needs generally is affiliated with people who are individuals on the spectrum who are nonverbal or have limited verbal skills. And so everything that Jonathan touched upon is really, really crucial because in the same note, even if there's a basic communication of a hand holding and a leading, you know, and a pointing. If we're pointing to a toy or we're pointing to a ball or pointing to something that we could utilize within the context of the practice itself. I had one little boy, there was kind of like a workout rolly, I can't even begin to explain it. It almost looked like a foam massage thing. I
Mhm.
used it to get him to practice the movement of a sotogari. He wanted to play with it and kind of play swords, and then we put it down and take our first step. then lift our leg up and sweep the actual foam padding into the Osoto guard. So you do have to, in those realms, I believe, be a little more flexible with your curriculum, have like a lighter structure, but see what they're leading themselves to, and then utilize that within the framework of your generalized structure. Do you agree with that, Jonathan?
I do, and I want to add something to it as well. A lot of it will come down to, if you are the core teacher, how creative and how tolerant are you willing to be? And so a lot of problems are solvable. There are almost always solutions. It's just an issue of flipping your own mindset and your own understanding of establishing something not as a problem, but as an opportunity.
Right, precisely. And I will say, as far as language is concerned, there's a lot of misconception about comprehension. Um, it's more of an output issue rather than an input issue. However, still the input issue is maybe a delayed response of processing. So if you're if you're on a time restraint, maybe try to stick to a two-word phrase, something that makes it simplistic initially, and then, as you're doing the activity, talking maybe. So if I'm saying Superman, and that means we're going to do the Tomonagi, I'm saying, okay. And he gets in the position, my feet are on your belly, and now we're going to flip, tuck chin, tuck chin. Those are really simplistic. What's the word I'm looking for? You're basically initiating the reaction with simplistic language, and then as you're doing it, tying it with, regular or more complex language, because
Mhm.
it's the initial processing that sometimes people misunderstand. You could tell a student to sit and it takes them about, a 30-second to 60-second delay, but they're going to accomplish that goal.
Mhm.
So the
No,
use
I
of
agree with that.
gestures, especially for high support needs, if they seem a little overstimulated, a lot of times I might not even use language. I might use 3 words the whole practice, and we'll use a lot more gesturing, a lot more signs, just this, reaching out for hands, then touching and saying, hands, please. Um, and having that gauge from your pairing and understanding how the student works and what makes them tick is also
Right.
really, really crucial.
There are some great advantages to taking even individuals with high support needs who are pretty new and having them in a private class, but also sometimes in a class with more individuals too. It just depends on specifically what you're trying to accomplish, the student's level of comfort and familiarity. I don't think there's any one size fits all answer. And so it may be the best practice in certain cases to do more of a private lesson or a very limited size class, in part to help support the sensory needs of the student. But at the same time, it may be best practice in certain cases, even for individuals with high support needs, to have them join potentially a much larger class or at least a moderately sized one.
And it depends on their learning style. Some
It does.
individuals are more patternistic thinkers, some have more like chameleon-like behavior.
Mhm.
So, observe, repeat. I have a lot of students that are that way, and I was that way growing up as a child. You kind of watch, repeat, whatever it is, and you mimic these things. So it really just depends on what type of learner they are. And as you get to know them, you'll be able to see, like you said, there's no one size fits all. So it's kind of a process to see what specifically is going to accommodate that person as an individual, not as a label, but as an individual that has, characteristics of that label, if that makes any sense.
It does. It makes crystal clear sense. All
Uh,
right. So
yeah,
that was our students with high support needs.
I support
Uh,
needs. Go
did you
ahead.
want to talk about our moderate or our low support needs students?
Um, I can let you continue with the moderate, and I'll go
Oh, sure.
for low
Okay.
support.
So our students with moderate supports, it's they can go either way, and a lot of it can depend on their level of familiarity with you, with the other instructors, with some of their peers, with the precise nature of their needs. The first thing I should reiterate is, once again, there's no magic one size fits all answer, and a certain degree of creativity, and I would say tolerance is needed. So you need to have a pretty clear idea in your head what your plan is going to be. And a lot of times, one of the best ways to form that plan is by observing the particular student beforehand and having in-depth conversations with them and or their caregivers or parents, and having a strong understanding of who this person is. What are some things that could potentially set them up for failure, and avoiding those things and mitigating those risks, and also some specific things you can do with them as individuals that'll help predict their success.
Yeah, just to give my 2 cents with the moderate verbal students. So a lot of times when we have high support needs students, it's just simply about kind of looking at everything in the spectrum of steps. So how are we breaking down these steps? So if it's a two-step process, maybe the moderate support needs student can ascertain a way to mimic those 2 steps relatively more easier than somebody with a high support need. High
Mhm.
support need, it might be something as simple as touching their leg and pointing at a cone that's green and saying green. And then, doing some type of like physical movement of their leg. Yay! And there's some type of automatic consequence in their mind where, okay, I moved my leg that she touched to green cone, and versus with a moderate support needs student, okay, left foot green, right leg up. Um, so when you're looking at their support needs, I think that the higher the support needs, the more you have to break down those steps. And as you
Mhm.
kind of go up the tiers to an individual who's low support needs, you might not have to break those steps down as
Mhm.
specifically with as many gestural cues
Mhm.
versus verbal cues. So
Mhm.
again, no, not one size fits all. Um, when it comes to low support needs, that's always my favorite individuals because there's a lot more expression when it comes to special interests. I think utilizing special interests to interpret any type of curriculum that you are initiating with a new student or any student for that matter, uh, it's fun. So I had one young man who was highly interested in evolutionary theory. And
Mhm.
so we kind of talked about and translated judo into evolutionary theory as we were doing the activities that kept his brain engaged. So using more complex verbal instructions while maintaining clear structure is really important. Structure is so important um, for, I think, a trust aspect for a lot of these individuals. They know what to expect. You might be able to kind of put in a little surprise here and there as long as it's tied to something that you know that will create a positive behavior and a positive consequence within that context. Encouraging self advocacy is really important, and being patient with question asking. I can't express that enough. When I have low support needs individuals who are more verbal with higher levels of independence, they the irritation can be sensed. So there's no question that's a dumb question, number one, because when the irritation, a lot of autism is defined by like hypersensitivities to things, not just physical, but also emotional. So tone of voice is really important. I found that I try my best to maintain as monotone as a voice as possible with these individuals. If a question is asked and in the back of your mind you say, well, I thought I said that, there might be a processing delay that's happening where, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've had a spouse or a family member say something and I heard something completely different because I wasn't looking at their mouth. I wasn't, you know, fully engaged in that conversation at the time because I was thinking about something else. So they could say, take the dog out, and I'll hear, um, the dog was on the couch. Okay, what do you mean? So kind of just making sure that engagement's there, ensuring that, a trick I always use because eye contact is generally just problematic and all over the spectrum. Look at my mouth. Don't look at my eyes. Don't look at my forehead. Just look at my mouth. So that helps a lot with the visual to audio connection that's happening, and problem solving. I think that there is something to be said about like pattern recognition when it comes to a lot of people that are on the spectrum. So it's a positive thing that you can capitalize on. And then also allowing for more variation and creativity and practice. And that kind of ties back, I think, once you get into the pairing process and make yourself a reward for that student, then you can kind of pull from that creativity, have the parents maybe, I always, with all of my students, I have the parents create a special interest list and a triggers list. So certain things that will trigger their behavior that I might have to start desensitizing them to, not in a dramatic form, but in small doses. And that goes
Mm,
across the board from any level of support needs. And understanding what their special interests are and why the parent thinks they're interested in them.
mhm,
I had one little boy, he loved Little Mermaid, and it was because she lost her voice and he could speak on an AAC device,
mm.
which for anybody who's not knowledgeable, that's just when they utilize like an iPad to either create sentences with visuals or type things out themselves. And without me knowing that, I would have just been Mickey Mouse all day long and talking about Disney all day long versus seeing what the deeper connection is. So I think making connection to things that are important is tied into that creativity within the practice itself. Do you want to expound on that?
I do. I have a number of comments. I love how you brought up breaking things into steps, and that already pairs so beautifully with some of the existing pedagogy in judo. We have the idea of kazushi, sakuri, kake. We already use these heuristics to split up and to teach and analyze these judo concepts. And you have these great tools we can borrow from other fields of psychology and education, like forward and backward chaining, that already fit so well with these things. We normally teach osotogari, for example, and as a forward chain. We take the step, we break balance, we begin to set up our frame to execute our lever with our legs. But if a student struggles with that, it might make sense to still keep that process, but use it as a backward chain. Start them in the very last step first when they're going to execute in the kake, and then reverse it backwards, and then teach the preceding steps from there. So I see this natural mix between these ideas and skills, and that makes sense because Jigoro Kano was an educator. And so some of these concepts are shared between different fields of education and extend across time, even pushing back 150 or more years in some cases. And so I just really wanted to touch on that for a second and mention what a great idea that is. I also really wanted to pause and look at our low support needs individuals and the value of self determination. And I mean specifically psychological self determination. If you think of tools that can build a person's capacity, martial arts, the Budo, is up there anyway. And I have a bias. I think judo's foremost of that. I have a favorite child. It's called judo. Um, but if you look at how the martial arts over time increases a person's psychological empowerment through a system of progression, that's the belt system, and increases their standing in the group, it's very empowering. And it's such a powerful tool for teaching psychological self empowerment. And I think we really ought to pause and consider other practices in judo that can increase an individual's self determination. And
Mhm.
all this fits together. It's not separate fields, it's all one field. It's just how you choose to view it. And I
Mhm.
want to say that too. So as I look at this, what are the choices a person with low support needs could make? What autonomy can you give them now? And of course, it's going to be based on their level of experience and their age and their stage. But I look at it, a lot of it, as a tool for choice making and for teaching psychological self empowerment, especially with our individuals who initially may have fewer support needs.
Mhm.
Does that make sense, Lauren?
Absolutely. I've had a lot of individuals who have low support needs actually facilitate adaptive judo classes with me. And they're learning. I mean, I had one young man, he kind of started off on a minor power trip. Like a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. And I had to sort of scale him back, and he was practicing his own social skills by assisting individuals with moderate to high level support needs. So it was, again, just kind of mutual benefit for all. And when
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at all of these different support groups, as Jonathan said, not one size fits all, but the breakdown between private session approaches and group session approaches can be a little bit different. Obviously, individual attention and pacing comes with the private session. Tailoring techniques to the student's comfort, learning style, processing needs. It may also help support like a quiet, controlled environment to reduce sensory overload. So especially individuals with high support, super high support needs. Um, you know, they might have to just do it in their home at first if you're down to do individual private sessions. Um, or within that space, maybe just have one uke for him to work with that can just be a great uke that keeps quiet so there's no distractions within that room itself. Now, the group session approach, there's a lot of balancing of individual needs within that group dynamics. There's specific strategies that you have to utilize for fostering interaction and social development, depending on the support needs of the individuals that are involved. Um, Specific warm-ups and drills, just basic things, open, close of your hand, open, lapel, grab the lapel. Those strategies might work for one student when it's not. So whoever the uke is can work with that individual to kind of, provide those prompts and break it down a little bit more. So it has to genuinely be a group effort when you are doing the group sessions themselves. And obviously the practice activities should be inclusive and supportive. I have one little boy that just could not wear the gi. His sensory issues were out of control. And so we adapted and his uke found a way to just work with it as far as like the no gi judo approach is concerned. And then providing additional sensory breaks and adaptive activities as needed. I have one young man where I will have a Lego station for him. Break, break, break. Set the timer. You have 2 minutes. Legos go, and the rest of the group continues their class. When that timer goes up, he gets up on his own and comes back because I think there's a trust that was developed where he understood when he's getting overwhelmed and he's about to have a meltdown, Legos, 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 boop, 2 minutes. And it's ingrained within the students that work with him. They know that that's what's going to happen. And it helps to reinforce a level of control within their own
Mhm.
mentality. Like, self-control is really, really crucial skill to learn and can be learned,
Mhm.
through judo. As far as the curriculum considerations are concerned, do you want to touch upon that? Because we're out of time, fortunately. We could
Yes.
probably talk about this for 3 hours.
Easily we could. So as I give the curriculum some consideration, um, I bear in mind there's already a really good curriculum in judo, the Gokyo no Waza, but it may have to be adapted or changed intentionally to support the students' individual needs. So, as I consider skill progression and adaptation, we're always going to start with the fundamentals, right? Our basic movements, our balance, our body awareness. And then over time, we gradually increase more to more complex things. Now, that's already set up beautifully in the Gokyo no Waza, but there might need to be changes to support the individual. There might need to be things that are added or subtracted or moved around. And that's something we can do. We have this great idea that's existed for over 100 years, but it's still a living thing. It can still evolve based on individual needs. And we, as the teachers or as the sensei, are empowered to do so as long as it's effective and it's helpful. And so, as I consider that, and I consider the idea that over time, I'm going to gradually build complexity, I have that idea of a graded syllabus for what's learned before supports what is learned later. And we move generally from easier to more complicated. I also will consider the sensory needs of the student. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this while being mindful of what they may or may not be sensitive to. Do I need to use a different sort of mat, a different sort of texture? I know you mentioned the use of the judo gi already, and in some cases, how that may need to evolve, and possibly even doing something different with the lighting or the ambient noise in the background. And so I loved, Lauren, by the way, how you told that story of the young man who was allowed to request breaks with Legos. What a beautiful example it is of not only good communication that's being honored, but also letting the young man make a choice for himself. And then honoring that choice and not just use it as a tool to say, well, the young man can't quite do it. It's a little too stressful. I think too often when supporting individuals with intense support needs, we let ourselves get frustrated and say, see, they can't do it.
Mhm.
when in fact they can, they just needed a modification. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing that story.
Yes, yes, of course. And you're going to have students. I had one young lady who had um, uh, noise reduction headphones that would go over her
Mhm,
head, and so her uke had to work around that.
mhm,
Um, you know, might even if they don't have a gi, maybe there's a soft jacket that they'd like to wear that they ritualistically wear that can still mimic the gi. So there's ways around all of these things. But I think over time, allowing the families to work with that student, whatever their favorite candy is, gi on, piece of candy. And a lot of times people find that to be demeaning, but I don't, because at the end of the day, we understand how serotonin works. And,
mhm.
it's just part of being human. I mean, we wake up and we have a cup of coffee because it boosts that serotonin for our day. That's just we're creatures of habit and we have a chemical makeup, within the constructs of our minds that we have to be attentive to, even as
Yeah.
neurotypical individuals versus neurodiverse individuals.
No, that's so true. I mean, you love competing. You've competed at the highest level possible. I still enjoy competing at a much lower level. But when I go to tournaments, even though I love judo and I love to compete, it's still fun to go out to dinner after and to go on a sightseeing tour.
Yeah.
There's still things we do that I'm not always sure we're very mindful of that reinforce our own behaviors. And that's all part of it too. And I love how you put it. These are tools of support that ultimately increase the individual's own choices. You mentioned candy, but that example you gave just a minute ago is a beautiful example of negative reinforcement and also a good example of good communication. And I know a lot of people confuse negative reinforcement with positive punishment. They're not the same thing at all.
No, no, no.
So, and as I look at that, I thought, you know what? Going back to that for just one more second, just because it was such a great example, not only was it good communication that was honored, but it was also choice making. And so, once again, whether we're talking about someone with very low support needs or very high support needs, we want to come back to the question again and again and again and again: what will increase this individual's ability to meaningfully make choices?
Mhm.
And
And
that's an
to,
example of,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I was going to say, and kind of like, because we probably have about a minute left.
Mhm,
As far as like, when you're looking at the context of everything that we just discussed, those clear, achievable goals in your mind. Okay, so within 6 month time period, I will get the student used to utilizing the gi. We're going to
mhm,
have a slow progression of desensitization to the gi, and some might need a longer, goal. That's just like off the top of my head, a 6 month term, where
mhm,
at least 1 out of 5 practices they put the gi on for a full minute, and then you
mhm,
increase it to 5 minutes. Regularly assessing their progress, adjusting the curriculum accordingly, providing positive, constructive feedback, and celebrating success. Now, obviously, you have to kind of determine who you're providing that constructive feedback to. But again, depending on their support needs, is how you interact with everything.
mhm.
And overall, just there's individualization for everybody that you work with. Have empathy. These kids are going through a struggle, and just again, if you guys need anything, reach out to us. I'm the judo community at yahoo.com. Email.
And so I'll be JONATHAN.SEMETKO at loganschools.org.
If you guys have any questions, please reach out to us. Obviously, Jonathan is well versed in all of this. So I was really excited to talk to you about this. I look forward to speaking to you again.
That was fun.